Imagine a cigar brand so powerful, so globally respected, that it was named after one of the most influential politicians in American history. A brand that dominated the premium cigar world for over a century, sold in the finest tobacco shops across Europe, the Americas, and beyond. Now imagine that same brand reduced to a ghost of its former self, still technically alive, but carrying a name that most modern smokers barely recognize, stripped of the prestige, the craftsmanship, and the Cuban heritage that made it legendary in the first place. That is the story of Henry Clay Cigars. From 19th century royalty to modern obscurity, this is one of the most dramatic falls from grace in the entire history of premium tobacco. Welcome back to the Forgotten Cigars. Let's get into it. The man behind the name. The name Henry Clay wasn't chosen randomly. It was a deliberate tribute to one of the most powerful and respected United States statesmen of the 19th century, a man known as the Great Compromiser for his ability to broker deals and navigate the most divisive political conflicts of his era. Henry Clay served as a United States Senator, Speaker of the House, and Secretary of State. He was considered one of the most influential figures in American politics during the first half of the 1800s, a name that carried immense weight and respectability both in America and internationally. Naming a premium Cuban cigar brand after Henry Clay was a savvy business decision by its founders. It immediately associated the product with power, prestige, and the kind of old-world gravitas that wealthy consumers of the era actively sought out. The brand was established in Cuba in the mid-19th century, and from the very beginning it positioned itself not as an everyday smoke, but as a cigar for men of means and influence, including politicians, industrialists, military officers, and the wealthy elite of the Atlantic world. The factory where Henry Clay cigars were produced, the Real Fábrica de Tabacos Henry Clay based in Havana, became one of the most storied cigar factories in Cuba, eventually becoming part of the broader network of prestigious Havana manufacturing operations that defined Cuban cigar production at its peak. The rise to global icon status. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Henry Clay cigars had achieved what few brands in any industry accomplish: genuine global prestige, recognized and sought after in markets spanning North America, Europe, Latin America, and beyond. The brand became closely associated with the kind of cigar culture that defined the Gilded Age, a period when tobacco consumption among the wealthy and powerful was not just acceptable but actively celebrated as a symbol of success and refinement. Henry Clay cigars were smoked by heads of state, business titans, and cultural icons of the era, reinforcing the brand's association with power and achievement in a way that modern marketing campaigns could never replicate. This was organic prestige built over generations. Distribution was extensive for the era, reaching high-end tobacconists and luxury hotels in major cities across multiple continents, making Henry Clay one of the most internationally recognized Cuban cigar brands of its time. The blend and construction were considered exemplary. Cuban tobacco, grown in the most prized regions of the island, was rolled by skilled torcedores in one of Havana's finest factories, resulting in a cigar that experts of the era consistently rated among the finest available anywhere in the world. For roughly a century from its founding, Henry Clay represented everything that premium Cuban cigars stood for: heritage, craftsmanship, exclusivity, and a direct connection to the specific tobacco growing traditions that made Cuban leaf the global standard. The Cuban Revolution and the beginning of the end. Like virtually every premium Cuban cigar brand, Henry Clay's story took a sharp, irreversible turn in 1959 when the Cuban Revolution brought Fidel Castro and his government to power. The nationalization of Cuba's tobacco industry under Castro's government meant that private cigar factories, including the legendary facility associated with Henry Clay, were absorbed into the state-controlled Cuba Tobacco organization, fundamentally changing how production decisions were made and who controlled the brand's direction. Relationships between the original brand owners and the Cuban state became deeply complicated, with intellectual property disputes, competing claims over the brand name, and disagreements over production standards all emerging in the years following nationalization. When the United States imposed its trade embargo against Cuba in 1962, Henry Clay faced the same existential crisis that devastated dozens of other premium Cuban brands, losing access to the American market, which had been one of its most important sources of revenue and cultural prestige for decades. For a brand that had spent over a century building its reputation in the American market specifically, the embargo was a catastrophic blow. Unlike some larger companies with the capital to rebuild production elsewhere quickly, Henry Clay's American operation found itself in an increasingly difficult position. Life after Cuba attempts to rebuild. In the post-embargo era, the Henry Clay name went through a complex series of ownership changes, licensing arrangements, and production relocations, as various parties attempted to keep the brand alive outside of Cuba using non-Cuban tobacco. Production was relocated to other tobacco-growing regions in the Caribbean and Central America, with manufacturers attempting to develop blends that could carry the Henry Clay name credibly, a challenge made more difficult by the fact that the brand's entire legacy was built on a very specific type of Cuban tobacco that could not be replicated elsewhere. Some versions of Henry Clay cigars produced during this transitional period received mixed receptions from longtime fans and collectors. Those who had smoked the original Cuban versions often found the replacement blends disappointing, while newer smokers who did not have that reference point were more receptive. The brand name itself became something of a contested asset, with different companies in different markets making competing claims to the Henry Clay trademark in various regions, a legal and commercial complexity that further diluted the brand's coherent identity. By the latter half of the 20th century, Henry Clay had gone from being a confident, unified global icon to a fragmented name associated with products of varying quality across different markets, a far cry from the singular prestige it had carried at its peak. Today, the Henry Clay name exists in a much diminished form compared to its historic peak. Cigars bearing the brand are still produced and sold, but they occupy a very different position in the market than the iconic brand once held. For most modern cigar enthusiasts, Henry Clay is either unknown entirely or recognized only vaguely as a historical name rather than a currently relevant premium brand. It is a dramatic reversal for a cigar that was once considered one of the finest in the world. The contrast between Henry Clay's historic prestige and its current market position is stark. This was a brand that once stood in the same conversation as the most revered names in premium Cuban tobacco, and today it is largely a footnote in cigar history, rather than an active presence in the premium market. Collectors and cigar historians treat surviving pre-revolutionary Henry Clay cigars as significant artifacts. They are genuine windows into an era of Cuban cigar production that no longer exists, and proof of how dramatically the landscape of premium tobacco can change in a relatively short period of time. Some enthusiasts and industry insiders occasionally discuss the potential for a meaningful revival of the Henry Clay brand, but re-establishing the kind of genuine prestige the name once carried would require a long-term investment in quality, storytelling, and brand identity that has not materialized in a serious way. Lessons from the Henry Clay story. The Henry Clay story offers a masterclass in how even the most deeply established brand prestige can be dismantled by forces entirely outside the control of the people who built it. Political revolution, trade policy, nationalization, and corporate fragmentation. None of these forces had anything to do with the quality of the cigars themselves, yet together they transformed a century-old global icon into an industry footnote. It also highlights the critical role that authenticity and origin play in the cigar world. Henry Clay's reputation was inseparable from its Cuban identity, and when that identity was severed by the embargo and nationalization, the brand lost something that simply could not be replaced by relocating production to another country. The fragmentation of the brand through competing trademark claims and inconsistent production quality after the embargo is a cautionary tale about what happens when a luxury brand loses coherent stewardship. Without a single focused vision driving quality and positioning, even the most storied names can collapse into irrelevance. And perhaps most importantly, the Henry Clay story reminds us that cigar history is full of names that were once at the absolute top of the industry, but are now almost completely forgotten. And this raises the question of which brands we consider untouchable today might look the same way a century from now. So the next time you're browsing a cigar shop and you happen to see a box with the Henry Clay name on it, take a moment to think about what that name once represented. A 19th century Cuban factory producing some of the finest cigars on earth, heads of state and titans of industry reaching for this brand by name. A global icon built over more than a century of craftsmanship, slowly dismantled by revolution, politics, and corporate fragmentation until almost nothing remained of its original greatness. That is the story of Henry Clay Cigars, from global icon to obscurity, one of the most complete and heartbreaking falls in all of cigar history. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit subscribe, because every week on the Forgotten Cigars, we dig up another piece of cigar history that has been buried, forgotten, or quietly erased from the story most people know. Drop a comment below and let me know. Had you ever heard of Henry Clay before this video? And if you have ever smoked one, old or new, I want to hear what you thought. Ring that notification bell so you never miss the next forgotten legend. See you in the next one.